Hello, everybody. This is Brenda. I'm Brenda, one of the crowdfunder coaches, and I cover the Scottish border area. And I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Kirsty.
Hello, everybody.
And I'm based in my business up here in Perthshire just now. And I wonder, Kirsty, can you hear the noise of the workies upstairs?
You can hear the banging, yes, unfortunately. All good plans.
We had an arrangement that would be nice and quiet, but it's the hazards of dealing with in your business. What we'll do is I'll pop my earphones in shortly. But whilst we're waiting for everybody to arrive, they really are. They are genuinely lifting the floorboards up there. Let me talk you through some stuff, okay? So Kirsty and I are two of the members of the Crowdfund Scotland team. And Crowdfund Scotland has been going for 2 years and 9 months. We're a leader-funded project. And we originally went for 2 years. We got a 9-month extension. This is our last week. 22nd of July is the last day. And we were really keen to get a chance to speak to SOSE because, you know, you're obviously a new enterprise agency. But we just really wanted to get a chance to catch you before we went. So a big thanks to Isla and to Jessie for setting this up to make it happen. A wee bit of housekeeping. Apologies for the workies upstairs. But we took all of our webinars online at the start of COVID. We've kept it that way. It means that we can record our webinars and we can send a link out afterwards. If you've got any questions, if you look to the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a chat box. If you can just pop your questions in there, and Kirsten and I will pick those all up at the end. We're aiming to speak for about 45 minutes or so, and then give you time for questions and answers at the end, okay? That's all okay with you. Okay, we've got 15 people in. We've got a few more due. But you know, I'm going to just start now, and as I said, people can catch up with anything afterwards that they need to.
Brenda, one question before you crack on it. Do you want me to go through the agenda and you get your headphones?
That would be a good idea, wouldn't it?
Right. And you can pick up.
Okay, good woman.
Okay. So here's a few bullet points of what we're going to cover in today's session. So we're going to talk about the Crowdfund Scotland programme, what it's achieved over the last couple of years, we'll go through the different types of crowdfunding that are available in general, and we're going to focus on rewards-based crowdfunding and how that works. There are many benefits to crowdfunding, not just money, so we're going to be covering off what comes out of running a crowdfunder and the 3 steps to success, what 3 key things are required for a successful campaign. We'll touch on the financials around the fees and any tax, and we're going to give you a list of what resources you can tap into for support for further information. And then we'll have the Q&A at the end, as Brenda's just said.
And hopefully by the time that we finish the event today, you'll feel that you understand what crowdfunding is, and you'll feel that you know enough about how it works that you can signpost some of your clients to it, because we're having a look at your vision and your mission, and it's not similar to ours, where ours was to help and work with communities, individuals and businesses across Scotland and rural areas and help to just build the economy. A big part of that is leaving a legacy, so that's why we're here with you today. Okay, let's look at, to give you a wee bit of context, we don't usually do this with people, but because you're a kind of enterprise agency, we thought you'd be interested in this. Whilst we've been running this project, the projects that we've run or that we've worked with, that we've coached directly, have raised about £1.4 million through a whole series of just over 800 crowdfunding projects. So about 91% of that was through people running their own projects, and about 9% of that was through match funding, because we work with local authorities, private companies like maybe NatWest, RBS. We sometimes work with enterprise agencies. You've got Creative Scotland, M&S in there, so they were able to come and provide some match funding. Our big funder was Leader. Thank you, Leader. And you'll see that they got a pretty good return on their investment, because every pound they spent on us, we managed, the crowd managed to raise £3.57, so that's a pretty good return for them. We had a target of coaching 450 projects, and it just worked really well. We come in at 815 projects in the end, so that's the number that we we had one-to-one coaching sessions with, and we managed to get 293 of those to go live. Now, I know that work, Kirsty and I have done a lot of work with businesses over the years, and getting any set of businesses where that high a proportion actually go on to launch is a really good figure. We were delighted with that. And we found that when you split it, the 800 comes down to about 300 that were business projects and about 500 that were community projects. And you've got some individual work in there as well. I think a big test for us was COVID. COVID happened slap bang in the middle of our project. We didn't know how that was going to affect us. But it was a really good test. Crowdfunding, it's a form of alternative finance, different ways to get money in. And communities were the first to jump in. They embraced it more quickly. Communities like my own one, I ran a crowdfunder to help us get money together for community action. The businesses very quickly picked up on this as well, and they used it for a lot of cash flow and lots of really creative projects. So we had about 187 projects that came in on the back of COVID, and you can see that they raised about £750,000 in COVID-related business and community projects. So it proved to be a really good tool for that. Okay, now Kirsty.
Step in now. Yeah, so different types of crowdfunding. So back to basics. What are they? So equity, we'll start on the right-hand side there. Equity crowdfunding, you've heard of, is where people are raising money from the crowd, but in return for a share of their business. So it is an investment, usually used by companies where they're looking to maybe launch a new product or to, just for company growth. So it's not something that we do at Crowdfunder. Next one along is lending. So that sort of peer-to-peer lending is known as lending crowdfunding. So companies such as Funding Circle, where they raise money into a big pot, if you like, from the crowd, that then gets loaned out to people, but the loans are repayable and there is interest as well, so to be paid. So again, we don't get involved in that. What we do offer is community shares. Community shares, a bit like the equity, it's selling shares in an asset. So it's a lifelong investment. That's the key. One of the key differences between this and the equity is that community shares can only be transferred from person to person. They're not, they can't go up for sale on the market. The other key difference is that it's a vote per person as opposed to a vote per share. So nobody can monopolise the situation. And it's usually used for things like a village hall that is potentially not wanting to be kept on going by a local authority, and the community might want to take ownership of it so that they can keep the building running and use it within the community. I'm going to hop along to the end there on donations. So donations only crowdfunding is probably what most people are familiar with. It's when people are maybe doing an individual challenge of running a marathon or going for a cycle, or they're fundraising for a charity, and so that is actually crowdfunding, and they're just looking for effectively sponsorship. So we do offer that on our platform, but what we're most known for is rewards-based crowdfunding, where there's something available in return for a pledge or a donation, and that's what we're going to focus on today. A little bit later on, we'll talk about exactly what rewards-based crowdfunding is. So how does crowdfunding actually work? Well, it's fairly simple once you've got the planning in place. So you add your project to crowdfunder.co.uk. We host that page for you, and the page gets a unique URL, which you then, as a project owner, will promote to get people to go to the page and donate. That page will contain your story, so you have to come up with some good words. You add a range of rewards that you can offer if you're doing a rewards-based crowdfunding, and then you launch your project. So it's worth making a bit of a noise about it. We'll cover that later as well. So you go live, usually for about 4 to 6 weeks is the recommended time, and then it's just share your crowdfunder page, and then it closes and you receive the money, all being well. And one of the key questions, the biggest questions that we get from people is, who's going to pledge? Why would they pledge? Once you can get your head around that, there are several, and people will pledge, and there are several reasons for that. Then that really helps you to focus on putting your campaign together. So what are those reasons? The top one there is that they want to simply support the project owner. They're a friend, their family, their colleague, they know them personally, and they just really want to support what they're doing. They believe in them as a person. The bottom left there, they think that the project is worthwhile. So again, they may or may not know the person, but they hear about the project, they believe in the idea, and they can really see the benefits that that project is going to bring to communities, to the business, and to whoever is going to benefit from it. And they want to see that happen. And then on the right-hand side at the bottom, they want the reward. So again, people may or may not be actually directly associated with the project, but if the project's been creative enough with their rewards and they appeal to their supporters, and it's exclusive, it's really good value for money, then they will pledge and they will get that reward because that's the only opportunity to get it, and they want it. If you can get that person, those supporters that hit all three of those buttons, then brilliant. That's the sweet spot that you want to find.
Okay, I'm going to take you through the different types of rewards. I think Kirsty mentioned that you can get types of crowdfunding where it's purely based on donations-based crowdfunding, and then you get ones where you use rewards. The reason we go down the route or encourage rewards-based crowdfunding is we found that people tend to donate more. Now, we have about 300 new projects come on board every day, so we've got literally thousands and thousands of projects. And we found that across the board, the average amount that people will donate, if it's just a donation, is about £12. But if you go to a rewards-based project where people get something in return for the money that they make, it can come in at 3 or 4 times as much as that. It's closer to £50. So we encourage people to come up with rewards. We encourage people, when they put the pages together, to have different price points and to have as much variety as possible. And you could probably break them down into these main categories. And these can all work across whether you have a business or a community group or an individual. The most common type is probably when people offer products or services. Now, these are perfect for businesses because it's an opportunity to effectively forward sell what we do. The most basic example would be if a cafe wants to raise money. They could say, if you donate £10, you can come in and claim a cup of tea and a bun. But we've used that in so many different ways. It can be, products can be, it could be when you hire a venue. It could be, let's see, I had one recently where they were really struggling. They came up with, you could make a donation and you could shear a sheep. The more creative and the more genuine, authentic it is to your community or your business, the better. One of the examples we'll look at later, they used it to sell their beer products. Gin, it's very common to do that. People who might provide a service like hairdressing or anything like that. The experiences and events, that can be, it's a great way to forward sell tickets to events. I mentioned the sheep shearing. We have like zip lines, any kind of adventure if you've got maybe adventure activities. Going up the line, corporate ones are often when you maybe have at a higher level or the higher price point ones. So, for example, I had a project recently where they were selling, somebody was making and selling raised beds, and some of the local companies came and paid to put some of the bigger ones to have them installed in the local primary school. And at the other end of that, I was saying you want to have products on that everybody can afford. So sometimes people on a tighter budget, they might just come in with a couple of quid. You still want to include them. And they can maybe get a shout out on Facebook, their name on a wall of fame or something like that. So you can be really creative with rewards. And people will, as they get the hang of the crowdfunding page, they'll develop this and be more experimental. Now, when it comes to crowdfunding, the reason most of us set up a crowdfunding page, and Crowdfunder actively encourages us as coaches to do this, you usually do it because you need the money for something. But when you speak to all the projects that we've coached, they all say, yeah, we went in for the money, but we got so many other things out of it. The first thing I'd say is it's a really good way to try your idea, to validate it, whether that's a new product or service. If you're a community group that's maybe going to try out some new experience, it's a nice, safe test ground to do it. And say, for example, you were a gin company that was wanting to raise money to extend your premises or bring out some new lines. If people don't pick up on that particular on particular products, they'll maybe go for one over another. That tells you something. How well or how poorly things perform will tell you a lot. That's why the project that you start off with on day one is often very different at the end. It's a good safe space to experiment. The other thing is crowdfunding is basically a big marketing program that brings money in. The ultimate aim is you want to make as many people as aware of your project or your business as possible. And one of the things I do with projects when we start, as I always say in the first meeting, how many followers do you have on Instagram, Facebook, any other socials? How many people, how many contacts do you have? Is there any way we can measure your crowd at the start? And then at the end, I often look at it with them again. So you will, when you run a crowdfunder, it's all about raising your profile. And we find that when people, if you manage to get people to reach for their wallet and pledge in your project, something happens in there. People become advocates, long-term customers. I know that Kirsty and I as coaches, we constantly see really good projects and we're always supporting them. And we keep an eye on them, not just because we're coaches, but because we feel that we've kind of invested in them. So you can get very long-term customers from that. And they often tend to share what they're doing with their friends as well. Now, everybody says they learn an awful lot when they run a crowdfunder. You think you know what you're doing at the start, and it's a bit of a vertical learning curve. You will definitely learn new skills, and Kirsty will take you through that in more detail in a minute. But the other thing that's really important is there's extra funding, and that comes into two elements. One is, as you well know, funders like to spread the risk. They don't like being the only funders involved. So they love to see that you have gone out and fundraised from some other source. They tend to view funds brought in through crowdfunding as very high caliber because you've effectively gone online, rattled your can, you've got the public involved. So they just view that as kind of gold standard fundraising. The other thing, and again, we'll touch on this in more detail, is Crowdfunder UK, our kind of parent company, work with organisations all the time to set up match funding pots. And they work with the private sector, local authorities, all kinds of agencies to have those funds in place. So it just means you might go in it just for the money, but you probably come out of it finding that you've picked up an awful lot more than that. And I always say to people that there are three reasons that, well, putting together a successful crowdfunder is like a three-legged stool. You need a cracking team, a cracking network, and a cracking story, and you need all three. If one of these isn't there, your three-legged stool is not going to work. And Kirsty's going to talk you through some of this.
Okay. So we'll start with the team. So this is, again, just following on from what you said there about the many skills involved, Brenda. As a project leader, we always encourage people to get on board as many people as they can around them, whether that's within the organisation that they work with, or if it's friends and family that can help out, because there's quite a lot required, certainly. So first of all, we start with the planning skills. So you need some organisational skills so you can work out your timelines. When are you going to go live? What needs to be done before you go live? You know, who you're going to be promoting to. It takes a lot of thinking about to start with. The making of the video, again, that is always useful if someone who has good technological skills can be involved. Yes, most smartphones do now record, you know, a decent video, but it's just upping the game of being able to then edit that video, trim it a little bit, make sure there's no bad background noise, little details like that, which just put the finished stamp on it. Writing the story is key. So we're going to cover a little bit about the story in a minute, but you do need a bit of wordsmithery there. Slightly different to writing a funding application, for example. This crowdfunder very much needs to be in layman's terms. You're talking to the person in the street, and it needs to be in very simple language, but also a little bit salesy, so people can believe in your idea and you get the buy-in. So writing the story actually takes quite a lot of effort, and we always suggest doing more than one draft. The creating of the page. So again, basic computer skills are required. Our platform is very easy to use. It talks you through it step by step. But you do need to be familiar with how to upload a video, upload images, move text around potentially as well. So it's a little bit of skill to that. The promoting of the project, again, there's all forms of promotion need to be used and tapped into. I'm going to cover those off in a second. So, you know, if you've got somebody involved in the project who loves talking and is a whiz on social media, so again, you want to get those people that are constantly looking at their phones all day, every day. Those are the people that you want to try and get involved with the social media and to give you hints and tips on how to best reach an audience. So with the network, one of the first tasks that we always say to people to do is to create a network map. It can be a written list or it can be a mind map like this, but it will help to inform so many of the decisions you need to make around your crowdfunding. So what we say is to sit down and just literally write down everybody that you know, start closest to you with your friends and family. Then if it's an organisation and you're looking at staff and volunteers, then moving on to customers or members, and anybody who's associated with the organisation and with yourself as an individual. Press and blogs, you're going to start making a note of any local newspapers that you'll be able to get in touch with to tell your story, because local press love a local story. Any bloggers, if the crowdfunding is linked to an industry that has bloggers, which most of them do now, so it's always worth trying to identify them and get in touch with them to see if they'll write about your project. Local people and community, it's vital to tell people what you're doing in the local vicinity so that they know well, what you're doing, how it's going to affect them as well. Because if it's a community-based project in particular, people want to know what's happening around them and you know, support the project and make sure that it happens. Facebook is key. All social media is important if you have a presence on it, but Facebook seems to be the most effective one for actually getting the pledges in on pages. So we always say to people, how many followers do you have? You know, what kind of demographic do you have following you? Think about that and write when you're writing the story. And also if somebody doesn't already have a Facebook page up and running and it's an organisation or a business, it's always good to grow your audience there first before they launch the campaign. And partners or anybody who's associated with the organisation as well, always tap into them. Particularly for businesses, sometimes the suppliers to businesses can be really good sources of rewards, for example, because ultimately they will benefit by the business being successful, because the business will obviously then go to them for more supplies. So that can be quite a good one to tap into. So again, this network map that you've done is going to help to inform your marketing plans and the promotion. So you'll be able to group people into certain types of audience. So are they likely to donate? Are they likely to promote your project because they've got a great network that you can then tap into? And then what form of communication would be the most suited to that particular audience group? So if you normally communicate with people via email, continue with email, but make it personal. No group emails. People tend to just delete those. But if it's a directly addressed to somebody, then it's usually quite effective. Social media I've mentioned, so really want to build on your presence there and gather the crowd and warm them up before you go live, and then keep the momentum going with lots of varied posts and varied content. Website is important. If there's one in existence, then it's always worth funneling all your traffic from the website to your crowdfunder page throughout that 4 to 6 weeks live campaign period. So we provide as a company a widget for people to add on to their website page if they have one, which provides them with a little graphic of their project page, picture, image, and a direct link to their crowdfunding page. Events can be important to link into any existing events that might be happening. So if it's a charity, for example, or community group, if they have some events already lined up, use those as an opportunity to promote, even potentially build that into when you go live into your timeline. So you know you're going to have the opportunity to market the crowdfunder and get some support. Some face-to-face events are starting to happen now. These are really good for putting posters up at or having leaflets. But even if it's just has to still be online, so Facebook Live can be really good for that as well. And print, traditional forms of marketing are still really effective. So posters and leaflets, as well as word of mouth, just speaking to everybody that you bump into. And press, finally, mentioned that earlier, getting in touch with local press usually comes towards the end of a campaign when you've got some money on the page and you've got something to shout about to that wider audience. So onto the story element. So this is all about making a great looking page and drawing your audience in. So in the story, it needs to be compelling. You need to sell the idea and be confident in your idea. So again, if it's a business, what would you put in a marketing brochure to draw your customers in? Be honest and be transparent so people know exactly where their money is going and what it's going to be spent on. And be clear with no jargon. Nobody likes jargon, especially if they're out with a particular industry. So you want to get that buy-in from as wide an audience as possible. So make it nice, plain language, easy to understand. And make sure the who, what, and why is covered. So who you are as a project, what you're trying to achieve, and the issue that you're tackling, and why you want to tackle that issue as well. Why it's so important. Put yourself as a project owner. We always say, put yourself in the pledger's shoes, and what questions would you ask before you decide if you're going to donate or not, and try to answer those up front within the story. And the other part of the story is the visual side of things. So we want quality images on the page with people in them. People love to look at people faces, but also if it's a business one, you want a product or a brand in there as well, so people get a feel for how the company is going to be. A video, we always recommend doing a video if possible. So it tends to increase the engagement with supporters, adds more of a personal element, particularly if you have a person in front of the camera rather than just talking over some pictures, although that is an option if people are camera shy. But pledges tend to be slightly higher for projects with a video, and so it doesn't need to be anything magnificent. 2 to 3 minutes is plenty, and just something fairly simple and effective. Headings and bold text on the page available on our page builder to allow you to do that, to help break up the text and put it into easy read sections. And finally, infographics can be quite good if there's some complex statistics available for the background information of a story or a campaign, but always making sure it's simple, making sure they're relevant to the actual campaign and easy to see on the page.
Okay. So let's see if we can give you a few examples to put all that, or to bring it all into life, okay? We're going to start with now, I don't know if any of you know Broughton Ales. You've got the Broughton Brewery in Biggar. It's not easy to say. And they're one of the projects that came to us during the COVID crisis. And the brewery has been going for 40 years. And the majority of their produce goes out to the bars, pubs, restaurants. And of course, with everything being closed during COVID, they suddenly found that they just could not function and had to shut their doors. But as you well know, even though your doors are closed, you've got very significant overheads, and they were really struggling for cash flow. So we worked very closely with them to set up a crowdfunder. They pulled together really well as a team. They ran an excellent campaign. We'll send you a link to their project page later on, and you'll see that they really pulled out all the stops with producing a really good video. It brought it to life. It shows you the people behind the business. And over, I think, a 4 or 5 week period, they managed to raise £32,000, which was critical cash flow at short notice. And one of the good things about crowdfunding is that you can, when you frame what it is that you want to use the money on, it's as long as you keep it within the spirit of what you've described, you can often use it for the kind of more mundane things that other sources of funding might not let you use their funds for. So it's quite flexible in that way. So it was a great campaign that they ran, and they just tried things like, kept trying lots of different products. And with a week to go, they ran kind of an online tasting session. They managed to get some live music and bring some fun into it. So they ran a really good campaign. And another one from the Scottish Borders area was Bird Garden Scotland. Now, I don't know if you've come across the Community Interest Company, but they're over at Oxton. And I'd called down to see them. I wanted to have a nosy at the centre. I knew that they'd successfully applied for leader funding. And about 5 years ago, they had raised £4,000 to get a baby barn for the flamingos, or the flaminglings. And they'd been very successful in that. And they'd also, 2 years later, because they'd worked out how to do it, they needed a house for the adult flamingos. So they went back to it again. So one of the things with Bird Garden Scotland is they are a serial crowdfunder. And when I popped in to see them in November last year, the problem they had was when they'd applied for leader funding, they depended on getting visitors through the gates and to use that income to release the leader funding. So they're suddenly in a really sticky position. So we chatted it over and we're saying, well, look, we can put this together. You know what you're doing. We can get the money in very quickly and we can be flexible in how you use it. So Owen and Mark and the team ran a really creative campaign. The campaign morphed over time as they tried new ideas, new rewards, and they ran a first-class campaign. We were really, really proud of them. So it just shows you sometimes when businesses need to raise money quickly and flexibly, crowdfunding can work for that. And once you've got the skills to run a crowdfunder, you'll probably use them in lots of different contexts after that. Now, Kirsty's going to take you through one of hers.
Yeah, so this was one I worked with in Fife, and I like it because it's a creative project. It was community based. They're Strathconness, just outside St Andrews, and they're refurbing or renovating their community park. Now it's part of a larger project, this crowdfunding one. I think the total costs were coming in at 130,000. So evidently they have other funding from other sources, but this was really focusing on getting the community members involved. So they used what we call our multiplier function, which is great for fundraisers because it creates almost like a parent project, which they named Strathstride. And it was launched last year, and it was actually Strathstride 2020. And individuals could then run their own little offshoot fundraising pages where the money although then directs into the parent project. So it's really easy to run. And it's almost just like people doing individual sponsored events. So we had lots of people doing just walking, but we had children who just learned to ride their bike, and they were cycling the equivalent of a marathon, and some were doing swimming in the sea and such like. So it was just really good for getting the community directly involved and actually doing something active as well towards raising money for their own park. And they've also kept it going with our Forever Funding function, and they have launched Strathstride 2021. So to date, they have 28 people raising funds towards it, doing their own little challenges, and they're just at £9,000. I think actually that figure is gone over £9,000 and needs updating now. So yeah, a really great creative way of getting the community involved in a project.
Okay, hopefully one of the things you've picked up now is that no two projects of ours are the same. They're all very different, and that's something we really enjoy. But the common thing that they have is everybody's first question is, how much can I raise? And what we say to people is, it's not just a matter of how much you need, but let's be realistic about it. So a starting point is, we always say to people, well, okay, what is it they actually want to do? What's the least that you can make your project happen with? So, for example, with Bird Garden Scotland, I sat down and said, okay, break the budget down. What do you need to open the doors? If you were to hit that target, what would you do with it then? So the starting point is a basic rule in fundraising is the less you ask for, the more likely you are to be successful. So you want to take it from there. So that's why you start with the minimum needed and say, well, we absolutely need 5K. That's okay. That's your target. And then say, if you went beyond that, if you were successful, I usually advise people not to go beyond an extra 50%. And that usually works out pretty well for a stretch target. That's automatically triggered once they have the first one. To give people a bit of a guide, because people find it really hard to pitch it, and they sometimes think that you just put up lots of zeros and go on your holidays and it'll just automatically happen. It doesn't happen that way. There's a lot of work in it. So what I say is a couple of rules of thumb will help you with the maths. We say, well, how many followers do you have for a start? If you look on your Facebook page and Instagram and your databases that you could use, how many people do you have in your network at the minute? And then we would say, well, a rule of thumb is for every 20 people that land on your project page, one of them is likely to pledge there and then. The other 19 will probably get distracted because most of them, 2/3 of them, will be on a smartphone. They'll be out walking the dog. They may not have their wallet handy. It might not be payday. They might have to cook the tea. And so when you run your project, you spend a lot of it trying to scoop all these people back. But so a rule of thumb is 1 in 20 will pledge. And as we said earlier on, the average amount that people will pledge on a rewards-based project is about £50. So we say, let that guide you through what size of project. So if you've got 300 followers, you're not going to raise £1 million. Okay. The other thing we say to people is when your project page goes live, the one thing we don't want to see as coaches, you don't want to see it go live with a big fat zero on it. And the reason for that is, you know, when you see a restaurant or a pub and there's no customers in it, and a lot of people just don't want to be the first ones in, they'll walk past it and they'll go on to the restaurant in the street that's got a real buzz about it, and their curiosity is getting them going. So we always say, make sure when you launch your project, launch it with a bit of a bang and a real buzz. So the guidance I always say to people is make sure you have at least 10% of your pledges in place. And I would do that by saying, work out, when you come up with your big list, you know, the mind map that Kirsten mentioned earlier, think, who are the people that you know best, the people that are most likely to come in, are keen to get involved. And you can go to them and say, look, we need a few early bird people to come in and prime the project. And if you know they're up for it, would you mind coming in at the start? You could maybe do a soft launch on the Monday when you send the link to the page out to these people, these warm contacts, but don't actually go public with it until maybe Thursday. And that gives you time to get these people in there. You can also be creative and do things like say, we're going to have special early bird deals for you lot to make them feel special. So that way, when I'm working with a project, I always want to make sure that they've got at least 10% there, because then when your page goes up, everybody thinks, oh my God, look at that, they're doing really well. You never want them to feel sorry for you. So I always give them that advice when it comes to choosing the target. Now, we touched on match funding earlier, and Crowdfund UK works with all the different partners. We've got partners we've got Stirling Council, they've got a pot of money that's used for match funding, as does Fife. We have a few other local authorities in the background and some national projects coming up as well. We work with the Aviva Community Fund, and they work across the whole of the UK. They allocate £25 vouchers to their staff. We've had, they tend to go for community projects. M&S have been going for sustainability and climate change projects, and Creative Scotland, as you can imagine, are coming on all kinds of creative and arts projects. The interesting thing is we'll send you a link for this later on, this one that you can see on the screen. And the useful thing is that way you can go in and have a nosy and see, you know, if you had a project coming up in your area, which sources of funding might be available for them. And this is constantly changing. As I say, down over the border, I know our colleagues have worked with the North East LEP and down at Solent as well. So we've got all kinds of partnerships bubbling up. Now, another thing about the types of projects that we run on crowdfunding, you get two main types. You get one that's all or nothing. If we raise X amount of funds, our project will happen. And the other one is whatever we raise, flexible funding. So with the all or nothing project, this works well for a project where you really do have to get the full amount or it's something that can't happen. Say, for example, I was working with a project in the Borders, Saved and Steading, and they needed to raise the money to secure the building for the future. If they hadn't raised the money, then the whole thing was just going to go. So it was an all or nothing. And when you're running a project like that, if in the unlikely event that you didn't hit your target, you wouldn't get charged any fees, and all the money would be returned to the pledgers within 7 days, and nobody's out of anything except effort and enthusiasm. So you get all or nothings. That can work with something like maybe if you're getting a statue, something that just needs all the money. Some people deliberately pick this because they say, as a project owner, I work best under pressure. Others, it can be a really big driver when you're a couple of thousand short on your project target, and you say to people, look, if we have to get this or we're not going to, the last few thousand are just simply not going to happen. It can be very powerful. But more commonly, people come in on flexible funding. Because in projects, again, like maybe the Broughton Brewery or Bird Garden Scotland, what they were saying was, whatever we get in the door, we're going to use that really well. So that's keep what you raise. And as I say, that's less pressure on people, and it's more commonly chosen. Now, Kirsty's going to guide you through fees.
Okay. So yeah, as a commercial company, we do have fees that we charge for hosting pages on the platform, for offering marketing and PR advice and such like. So we have a 3% platform fee, which applies to plus VAT, which applies to what we call a standard project, and that is all projects really, except charity or COVID-related projects. So for charity, if it's a registered charity, we waive that fee. COVID-related projects can be any type, so it could be a business, it can be a community group, or indeed a charity that is not a registered charity. But if their story is really based on how they've been impacted on by COVID, then they can opt for that and get the fee waived. For all projects, though, we have a transaction fee that applies, and this is to cover the charges for the Stripe payment system and for the card transactions. So that's 1.9% of the amount being pledged plus 23 pence per pledge plus VAT. So we always say to projects that are on the 3% fee, if they build in to cover all of the fees, looking at around 5 to 5.5% of their target will be deducted at the end. So to build that in and just be aware that will be payable. If they happen to be VAT registered, they can claim it back, and monies are paid out within 7 working days of the project closing date, minus those fees. So tax is something that we like to touch on very slightly, particularly for people who might be working with businesses. Broadly speaking, it's crowdfunding raised money is considered as business income. So if you're working with a business, they need to take that into account. And if they have an accountant that works with them, let them know early doors that they're going to run a crowdfunding campaign. It's subject, therefore, to their appropriate type of tax, so corporation tax for a limited company or a community interest company, and income tax for those who are self-employed or in a partnership. VAT may be payable on certain types of rewards if they are registered. So essentially, rewards are deemed as a sale. So they need to keep sales records and for every reward that is effectively sold, and it will be subject to VAT under the normal quarterly cycle that applies to their business. Donations may be deemed as a gift, and so may be VAT exempt, but it's very vague. Essentially, as that last point there says, up till now, there have been no HMRC investigations directly into crowdfunding. So there are no published guidelines, but there are some cases which have been brought to fore from sort of back in the 1970s and 1980s, which really are used as a bit of a precedent at the moment if it was ever to go to court. So we always just say, speak to an accountant ahead of running a crowdfunder if there's one available, or do your own internet research, just and err on the side of caution, record everything and assume that it's going to be taxable if you fall into the taxable bracket.
Okay, we're getting towards the end now, and although our team is coming to an end this week, we've got plenty of resources on the Crowdfunder UK website, and we'll send you a link to this. One of the things, we've got a coaching hub, and it's got loads of good resources. We've got video and PDFs, all kinds of stuff, depending on what your learning style is. But yeah, there's everything you need to know about running a project, coaching a project. We have Facebook accelerator programs where you'll get a cohort of people who are wanting to run a project. They can speak to each other, swap ideas. This is also, we get contributions from some of our best coaches, some of our most experienced coaches. So Kirsty and I and the other coaches, we all snaffle loads of ideas from the accelerator programs too. They're really worth jumping into. You've got webinars. Today's was focused on you at SOSE. We have other ones that are UK-wide, sometimes regional. Sometimes we do deep dives into things like, it could be all about rewards, all about how to find your crowd, very specialist ones as well. Some are very much business focused. We've got a series of online learning guides, just PDFs. And I know that when I've run a crowdfunder and halfway through I was thinking, how am I going to liven this up? They were absolutely brilliant. They're really simply written. Some just good common sense advice. As well as when people are running projects, sometimes they've got a really tricky question they can't find an answer to. We've got a support team. We use them all the time as well, because we know a lot, but we don't know everything. And they get back to you really quickly. They're excellent to work with. And as well as that, we get a lot of, you can imagine, with 300 new projects today, we also have a series of very tailored emails, personalized ones that are triggered when projects get to a certain stage. And the other thing, which I'm a big fan of, is we have live project analytics. So when a project is up and running, the project owner can go behind the scenes and they can get a really detailed breakdown day by day of how many pledges, how much, how many different types of rewards were coming in, so they can spot the patterns and they can learn how to replicate what works and what doesn't work. So it's really, really useful. And just to finish off with what we've covered, it probably seems like an awful long time ago with all that hammering at the start. But so we covered the Crowdfund Scotland programme and what we've done as a team and where it fits in and why we're here today. We said at the start we wanted you to understand what crowdfunding was all about. So hopefully you do now, and we've covered how it works, the fact that you get rewards-based versus donations-based crowdfunding. We've looked at all the benefits. People come in just primarily because they need to raise money, but an awful lot more than that, like a big marketing campaign. Kirsty took you through the 3 key elements, but the importance of having the right team in place, not just one person driving it all, building a network and being able to tell that story really well, and how you need all 3 of these in place. We also covered what good looks like, what a good page looks like, some success stories. We looked at Broughton Brewery, Garden Scotland, and Strathconness as well. And finally, Kirsty guided you through the finances, but we looked at how to set the right target and how the fees work and how the taxes work. So we've covered an awful lot of ground. So hopefully you can come back and watch this webinar as often as you want to pick up on anything that you need more information on. So Kirsty, this is for you.
Just finally, so let's cover off what the next steps are. So we're going to send out an email, or Brenda will, with a document, couple of documents, summary notes of what to look out for when you're supporting projects, green flags and red flags, and links to all the useful resources that we've mentioned throughout this as well, because we have so much. There are online learning courses that you can do, would be really useful. So you've got that more in-depth knowledge for helping projects, but then also they can be passed on to any project owners you work with. Have a look when you've got a spare few minutes to browse through some projects. So we've got on the main crowdfunder website, we have an explore function right up at the top, and then we've got filters in there. And if you want to see any of the projects that we have specifically looked at and looked after in Scotland, then our Crowdfund Scotland page will still be visible even after our team finishes. And finally, whenever you or people you're working with are ready to crowdfund, you simply go to crowdfunder.co.uk and hit the start crowdfunding button.
And I see that we've got a question in from Beth. It's a really good question, actually. What would we say are the most common pitfalls that groups run into when starting crowdfunding? I suppose one is sometimes you'll find that it's an individual will come to you. And as Kirsty said earlier, it's a lot easier if you've got a group. So it's better in a way if you've got a group coming to you. I suppose one thing we always prefer if we can have somebody coordinating at one point of contact. That makes it a lot easier for the group to operate. So having a solid team is one of the things. Other pitfalls, not being clear on what their timeline is. So we try to make sure that they've they've got a clear timeline, and they've given themselves enough time to set it up. They sometimes struggle to come up with rewards. And that's something we can really help with. When I was working with Burnham Arts up here, they were saying, "Oh God, what can we sell that people want?" And I was saying, "Well, you've got that great big hall, you've got that cafe, you've got the ceramics classes." So sometimes organizations or people, businesses struggle to see the value in what they're doing, and it's really useful to have somebody take a step back and take a critical look at it and help them to appraise it. And that's, I think, where your staff at SOSI can maybe be really helpful. What else, Kirsty?
I think sometimes there's a lack of planning. So all the planning we've talked about, we talk about it for a good reason. It's just really helps the campaign to run much more smoothly. It's less stressful whilst it's live, because it can be quite stressful, bit of an emotional roller coaster running a project, because you get all excited when the pledges come in, and then when it's quiet, you kind of get into the doldrums and think, nobody really wants to support me. But if you have that schedule planned ahead of your marketing, and you've already identified who your crowd are, that will help to make it a little bit easier and reassure yourself really that, well, you've done the planning, so it's going to work, and having a clear plan of action basically. So I think a lot of people tend to be too keen to go live to see what's going to happen before putting all the posts in the ground, sort of thing. So
I know that was really useful when COVID hit, because our project came to an end 1st of January before we had an extension. And we had a lot of projects that had kind of ground to halt because they felt they didn't have the capacity, or they didn't know if the public would have the money that would donate. But the ones that had done the groundwork, when our team kicked off again, they just kicked right back into action, picked it up, and they ran successful crowdfunders. So as Kirsty says, that planning made all the difference in the world. It definitely de-stresses it. We often send people out a kind of a marketing tool that helps them to plan for week -3, 2 and 1. Yeah, so those are some of the most common. The other thing, I suppose, we always really emphasize the importance of getting that 10% in place, because, as I was saying, if you can't, the people who tend to come in at the start of a project are the people who like you and know you already, your nearest and dearest. That can be in a business context. If you can't get your nearest and dearest to come up and support you, and they already like you, then how are you going to get people that you haven't met yet? Because as time goes on, you're starting to put the word out to people who are further and further away from you. So yeah, as coaches, occasionally we'll see a project that just launches out of the blue with a massive target, and they haven't planned it, and they haven't phoned us, or they haven't chatted it over with somebody with a kind of business head. So that's probably the most common things. But we're going to be here for another few days, but I suppose the main thing, our colleague Nicole has promised she's going to pick up any questions that people put in. And I suppose that's the other thing is we will be doing, I know Kirsty's been working really hard on putting a final projects report together for a leader. And some of the stuff that's in that might be useful to you is we're going to have lists of all the projects that we worked with in the different council areas. So that might help you to understand just the variety and sheer number of projects that we've helped so far. So hopefully now you all feel comfortable in crowdfunding, and you'll understand this is alternative financing is not rocket science. It's doable.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's us for today. So yeah, another big thanks to Jessie and to Isla for helping us to set this up at last. And yeah, just keep in touch. And if you've got any questions, be sure and drop a line to Nicole, and I'll be sending you an email later on today. Okay. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay. Bye.